Good evening. Welcome. I'm Joy Armstrong. I'm the director and curator of the Galleries of Contemporary Art here at UCCS, and I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's Visiting Artist and Critics Series talk featuring artist Karla García. Karla's exhibition, Between the Land and Sky, is opening this evening in our project space. I know many of you have already been there, but if you haven't visited the show yet, the gallery will be open until 8 p.m. The F.E.A.R.S residency program began in 2018, founded by VAPA faculty member Corey Drythe and former member Dr. Catherine Guinness, and is now a collaborative program with GOCA. I would like to thank our GOCA season sponsors, El Pomar Foundation, the Janine K. Sheehy Memorial Fund, UCCS Green Action Fund, UCCS Student Government Association, LART, and the generous members of our Curators Circle. We're so grateful to VAPA for their ongoing partnership and for the financial support of the many patrons who make our work possible. I'd also like to thank the GOCA student employees who brought in Karla's work so beautifully, helped install the show, Vivian Diggs, and of course, Lene Bowman Cravens for the amazing work in the gallery always. Did I hear a whistle? Yeah, yep, let's whistle and cheer for all of those people. Karla García is a Texas-based artist originally from Mexico. Her ceramic sculptural installations are rooted in her Mexican heritage and informed by personal and cultural memory, historical research, and philosophy. She explores the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative effects of the environment on the land that we share. Garcia earned her MFA in ceramics and a certificate in museum education from the University of North Texas. She is a Sandhills Institute Artist Fellow in Nebraska and has exhibited in museums such as the Nasher Sculpture Center, the Old Jail Art Center in Texas, and has completed a binational exhibition on both sides of the Texas-Mexico border. Please join me in welcoming Karla García.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Good evening. Before I begin, I want to thank the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs and the team at the Galleries of Contemporary Art for organizing this exhibition and artist talk and the residency here in Colorado. I'm deeply honored and grateful to be here with you tonight. A special thanks to Lene, to Joy, Corey, Vivian, and the students for your support and your care, and for this space to share my work with you. The exhibition Between the Land and Sky continues to be a reflection on my upbringing in the desert borderlands and the myths, literature, and personal experiences that have guided my practice. The mountains always remind me of my childhood. This is a view of the mountains by my mom's house in El Paso, and when I'm here, it kind of reminds me of that. They're not as great and large as the mountains here in Colorado, but they're still just as beautiful to me. It feels similar to the landscapes and stories that shaped me. And for this presentation, I'll be going through my research, inspiration, and my biography to provide context on how I think about my work. I grew up in Ciudad Juárez, just across the border from El Paso, Texas, in a small house where we found joy in our daily moments that have given me a foundation of a resilient and happy life. I grew up in Juárez in the 80s and early 90s, and I continue to cherish my family and friends who still live there. Living at the border, it was common for us to go back and forth between Mexico and the United States. People live and work on both sides, walking daily through the tunnel-like pedestrian bridge, the bridge that connects the two sister cities, and to me, it kind of becomes a conduit. It's like a passageway of language, movement, and cultural exchange. This year, I've been reflecting on those early years in Mexico. I was raised Catholic, and although I'm agnostic today, the rituals from that experience appear in my work today in ways that I hadn't fully understood. The repetition, labor, and patience are embedded in those practices, and I see them mirrored in my studio process and the installations that I create. This past spring, I taught ceramics at a Catholic university and saw the campus filled with religious imagery. It was actually kind of a serene feeling as it brought back vivid memories from my childhood in Mexico. I began to go back to read the biography of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz and her poetry. This one in particular, the first dream, has become an inspiration to my current work, which I will talk about in a little bit. So I attended Catholic school in Mexico, and it was founded by the Mariist Brotherhood of Followers of Mary. I remember nights at our school when families would gather together to pray the rosary, and I connect to this image with my nightly rituals today when I go outside and I say hi to the moon and give thanks for what I have. I was introduced to Sor Juana as a young child, and her story of courage has stayed with me since then. Sor Juana was a 17th century nun who, as a teenager, refused to get married so that she could pursue her education. This was the only way that she could continue her intellectual life. She studied philosophy, poetry, mathematics, mythology, and the cosmos. And of course, this wasn't well received back then. She defended women's right to education and advocated for the indigenous communities around her. She ended up having to sign a document titled Yo, la peor de todas, which means I, the worst of all women. And she was a nun. Most of her books were burned, and I think about her today as being regarded as one of the first feminists of the Americas. The poem that I've been interested in is her longest, titled Primero Sueño, or First Dream. It's a poem about the journey of the soul leaving the body in quest for knowledge and understanding. And I love that her work has continued to resonate for centuries later. The poem describes the journey of the soul reaching the stars and the transition of night and day through imagery of the sun and the moon, through classical mythology, exploring the relationship of the human impermanent life and the divine. In my work, I use the physical transformation from clay to ceramics and glazed surfaces to depict the cactus sculpture as embodiment of the Nahua myth of the desert deity that you see today in my installation. In my studio, I think about how I relate to these stories to my own experiences and how I can explore land, home, and heritage and memory come together. Before I go deeper into this work, I want to share a little bit of background and my experiences, how they have shaped my journey. Reflecting on the stories from my family, these are some moments that I wanted to share. Their stories became the first that I knew that continue to guide how I understand place and belonging. Like many families, mine experienced loss and separation. My parents divorced when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and we lost our home. My mom, my brother, and I moved in with my grandmother, a devout Catholic who was resilient and physically incredibly strong. I remember her carrying me, walking across a pedestrian bridge, and to this day, I have no idea how she could do this while also carrying shopping bags from the stores in downtown El Paso. Some of my childhood memories go back to this time with my grandmother. My mom had gone across the border to study nursing, and while my older brother and I lived with our grandmother, we watched her working with us and taking care of us. She was partially deaf in one ear, and she prayed the rosary every day, and I remember watching her in her morning ritual when she would drink coffee and read the newspaper front to back before beginning her day. She was patient, worked really hard, and cared for us deeply, and I feel her steadiness in my studio guiding the rhythm of my work. Our family comes from mixed ancestry, but there's no way to know which Native community we come from, and this is very common in Mexican families. My great-grandmother was a healer, a doula, and a homesteader whose knowledge came from ancestral practices. She lived on a ranch where my great-grandfather farmed and raised cattle. I think of my love for landscapes to be part of that ancestral knowledge that is passed down through our DNA. And I thank you for listening to my story. Our family histories become the experiences that shape us. Through this work, I embed the memories and as tactile impressions in the shapes and textures of my sculptures. My love for landscapes comes not only from my experiences, but from theirs as well. I attended the University of North Texas for my graduate program, and it was then when I began to look more closely at the matrilineal lineage of my family. My thesis exhibition included a piece titled Unorthodox, made from charred maize husks, spread across the gallery floor in the shape of my mother's portrait. While developing my thesis, researching this Mesoamerican mythology, I was drawn to the deities and Teotl, the maize deity of the Nahua cultures. It's a symbol of life and sustenance, and I charred hundreds of husks, first in my kitchen, and then, after I accidentally burned them in the oven, leaving a burn mark on the kitchen counter, I began to use the university kilns to char them to different levels, creating a value scale from light to dark. The work became an abstract portrait of my mother. I'm inspired by her curiosity, her love for knowledge, her passion for life, her resiliency, and her ability to find joy despite adversity. This piece represents my view of her through the materiality of the maize husks with the cultural mythologies of Mexico. I see her as a force of life who worked tirelessly for us to protect us and to provide for us. The exhibition combined unfired clay forms, burnt-out porcelain objects, the maize husk installation, and a projection. I felt that material became a language of memory, combining the ephemeral nature of the husks and unfired clay with light and shadow. The photo in this piece is titled Shadows of Home. It looks to the border cityscape. I took this photo from El Paso looking into Juárez, and I wanted to create a piece about memory, the way that we don't remember correctly, or when we also experience loss and it is difficult to think about these events. Both my older brother and my stepfather had passed away in those first few years of us living in the United States. The projection was abstracted to depict the passing of time and my way of understanding how we look at memory. I laser etched a slide made of glass with the abstracted image and projected it from a Kodak carousel onto the maize husk paper that I made. During my last year at UNT, I was selected to create a project at the Dallas Museum of Art Center for Creative Connections. I created Carrito de Memorias, a food cart inspired by Latin American traditions, and I built it out of wood using both digital and manual craft techniques, drawing from ancient designs and combining found objects like bicycle wheels and broomsticks to hold up the husk rooftop. I was thinking about cultural exchange at home. When my mother had remarried after we moved to El Paso, our new home became one of immigrants. I was truly in a multicultural household. We spoke Spanish, and my stepfather, who was from Syria, spoke Arabic to my younger siblings. The project invited visitors to respond to prompts about family traditions and memories. I made maize husk paper for their responses, which included drawings and writing. And I also created papier-mâché plates from their responses to place them on a table where visitors could see their stories reflected in a shared space for cultural exchange. In 2020, I began exploring the desert landscape more deeply. I spent a month in St. Raphael, France, working with a group of women artists from around the world. I began creating the cactus forms. I experimented with different ways of building them, but what felt most natural was an intuitive approach. I formed each piece from coil building, pushing the clay from inside the body and pinching the ridges from the outside. I loved how my fingertips remained visible on the surface, leaving traces of touch and presence. Each day, I walked along the Mediterranean shore and collected fragments of terracotta pieces scattered along the grass. I wondered where they came from and what stories they may carry. When I returned to the United States, the COVID-19 pandemic had just been announced, and soon after, we all entered the lockdown. At home, I continued exploring the cactus as a symbol of my Mexican roots and the resilience of desert plants. I call this Home and Land Project. I began creating these sculptures during the lockdown and documenting them through digital photography. As I made more, they began to feel like living beings. In my small house, they took over the whole space like they were in their own home. The unfired clay linked me to the desert, sprouting up as a kind of memory among the objects in my home. And I want to remind everybody that as artists, we have a drive to create even during uncertain times. This body of work became a way to explore the idea of home, not just as a physical space, but as something that exists beyond borders. The project was later exhibited at the Nasher Sculpture Center window series in Dallas, Texas during the pandemic. The museum, which was closed to the public, invited artists to install in the vestibule for 1 week at a time, turning that small space into a site of connection, a way for art to be experienced safely from outside. The installation included unfired cactus sculptures and a projected video documenting them in different places in my home, along with the terracotta fragments that I collected in France. In 2021, I expanded this series into a large desert installation titled I Carry This Land With Me. Through the symbolism of the cactus in ancient American and Native American mythologies, it is a symbol of endurance, protection, and survival. The installation featured unfired clay sculptures that appeared to rise directly from the ground. Each piece became a kind of self-portrait, forms inspired by my own and my family experiences of resilience. I also explored the physicality of land through clay drawings on paper. Each piece was made with terracotta slip, graphite, and charcoal, and they became studies of the desert landscape, the sand, the soil, and the plant life. Through these works, I translated the textures of land into line and shape on the symbolic surface of clay, connecting touch, memory, and observation. After this, I wanted to bring the work back to my hometown. It felt as if the desert itself was calling me. During my time at the Corsicana Artist and Writer Residency, I continued developing the Cactus works, and I began a new project titled La Línea Imaginaria, or the Imaginary Line. I spent a month working in the historic Oddfellows building using the third floor as my studio, a space where I could create and observe the pieces throughout the day as the light shifted. Over the following year, I spent time documenting various sites and organizing this project with the collaboration of the local government in Mexico. And this is John. This is my husband. I want to give him a big shout out as he helps me every step of the way. He builds crates and helps me load the work. And for this project, he helped me drive from Dallas to El Paso to Juárez for the installations. He's an amazing support for me and our daughter. And for this exhibition, he also came in and helped me get the work here. The collaboration with the Mexican government was invaluable. They helped secure permits and connected me with 3 museums that made this binational project possible, beginning with the Museo Casa de Adobe, or the Adobe House Museum. This is my oldest friend, whom I adore, and her daughter in the background, sitting with us just as we had dropped off the work for the outdoor installation of this project. The project began adjacent to the border wall, and this was an invaluable moment with a wonderful team member, where this project, it was really about collaboration and trust and dedication. The Adobe House Museums once served as the headquarters for the reformist leader and President Francisco Madero, who advocated for democracy and social justice, sparking the Mexican Revolution of 1911. Today, the museum recreates daily life from that period, exhibiting furniture and replicas that reflect that history. La Línea Imaginaria expanded to the Museo de Archeología e Historia del Chamizal in Juárez, and the Chamizal National Memorial in El Paso as a simultaneous binational exhibition. And in this map, it's just a picture from Google Maps. You can see both of the museums with the 2 hearts where I've been. So one on the Mexican side and one on the American side. The 2 museums preserve the story of the Chamizal region, a place where the border was disputed for more than a century due to the shifting course of the Rio Grande, until it was resolved peacefully in 1963. This became important for me as I was developing the project and wanted to choose sites that hold symbolic meaning, exploring how the land itself can carry these histories. The documentation of the outdoor project, including using some of the unfired cactus sculptures, and it took place across several locations, such as this site by the border wall. I worked with a photographer to capture the works in conversation with the surrounding landscape. In this photograph, the cacti seem to look toward the horizon. The desert envelops the wall, showing how the land exists beneath and around these structures. The harsh afternoon light emphasized every dent and mark of the sculptures. In contrast with the afternoon light, I also brought the sculptures to the Samalayuca Desert in the evening. The dunes were cool to the touch, and the landscape was untouched by man-made structures. At dusk, the color of the dunes shifted to the grayish tones, and I remember touching the sand, feeling the surface on my hands and my feet. The sculptures became a part of that rhythm in nature, blending into the terrain. The clay took on the hue of twilight as night fell, and it began to dissolve into the horizon. We photographed the work in that in-between light, a moment when the line between land and sky seemed to dissolve into the night sky. For me, that experience became about listening to the land, about existing in between, about memory and impermanence. The unfired clay carried its own fragility, and these forms became both offering and record, a way to honor the landscape spirit. At the Chamizal Museum in Juárez, the installation was inspired by the dunes of Samalayuca. The unfired clay cacti were arranged over an expanse of local sand, creating an open desert inside of the museum. Along the walls, I exhibited photographic documentation, clay drawings so that the visual language of the land surrounded the viewer. By placing the works beside the museum historical archives, visitors could experience a relationship between nature, history, and art, and how these shape our sense of belonging and identity. Across the border at the Chamizal Memorial in El Paso, the installation continued the dialogue. Unfired clay cacti, photographs, and drawings were arranged throughout the gallery, guiding visitors to move slowly through the space. The layouts reflected my own experiences in living in two cities, two languages, two forms of belonging, and it was divided and connected. The cactus sculpture stood as metaphors for endurance and regeneration, growing from the same earth despite separation. The exhibition invited viewers to see the desert not as an emptiness, but as a site of connection, an ecosystem that transcends human boundaries. The ecological presence of these ephemeral clay objects connected with the shared histories across the border. 30 photographs from the project were arranged on the gallery wall, with intermingling scenes from the border and the open desert, not in sequence, but as an ongoing conversation about land. The images continue to guide how I think about land, how we can imagine ourselves as a part of it, more connected to its rhythms and histories. The textures of the desert mountains, the presence of the object in relation to the surroundings, the ephemeral cacti among the grasses by the river inspire the grasses that you see today in the installation. The wild flora growing from the sand dunes and how dense or sparse they appear continues to inspire me. I'm drawn to how plants adapt and thrive in such extreme conditions, shaping the character of the desert itself. And then there are infrastructures that cut through the landscape, highways, walls, and power lines, all of which alter how we move through and experience the land. In 2023, I was invited to create an installation for the Cell series at the All-Gel Art Center in Albany, Texas. This was where the grasses first appeared in my work. Inside the cell, I installed terracotta ceramic grasses placed on reclaimed bricks. I titled it When the Grass Stands Still, and it was inspired by my research into the prairie landscape surrounding Albany, Texas, and by the nature of the cell itself, a space meant for confinement. I imagined the longing for nature during times of isolation, reflecting on our own collective memory of the pandemic and when the world receded indoors. The way that a single blade of grass can survive in unexpected places, between cracks in pavement or brick floors, or rising from dust, spoke to me as an image of solace and hope. Each ceramic blade was shaped by hand in a slow meditative process that marked time, the way that nature can thrive in unexpected ways and speaks to resilience. Through repetition, the work connects to Albany's ecology and cultural memory, honoring the land's capacity to hold stories across generations and inviting viewers to reflect on small gestures and how they can become acts of empathy. In the second cell, I placed my cactus sculptures and clay drawings, creating a dialogue between solitude and endurance, between the desert and the prairie. While I was in my studio working on this project, I was also working on a public art sculpture for the city of Fort Worth. The project gave me an opportunity to study the local history of the neighborhood surrounding the park. The research process included learning about the region's past and meeting with the community. It helped me think about public spaces and how cultural exchange moves along migration paths. Although I worked with a fabricator and an engineering team to realize this project, its ecological framework remained rooted in the land and cultural history. The sculpture was titled Seed the Future, and it stands 8 feet tall and is made of stainless steel. The mirror longhorn-shaped petals reflect the sky and the landscape around it. The form was inspired by the dandelion, a seed flower that travels far, carrying potential wherever it lands. The sculpture sits at Trail Drivers Park, a site connected to the historic routes where cattle drivers once moved between Mexico and Texas. And I wanted the work to speak to that exchange of culture, movement, and persistence. It has become for me a symbol of community, labor, resilience, and hope. As I continue to notice the similarities between desert and prairie, I wanted to deepen my exploration of grasses, how they adapt to different terrains and yet remain interconnected across ecosystems. In 2024, I created the installation titled Shifting Ground, inspired by moonlit nights at my home in Dallas, Texas. At night, I often step outside to feel the air and the ground and watching how the moonlight transforms the color of the grasses and plants. I was thinking about how we experience these grasses in our surroundings. Are they wild? Are they gardens? Are they ecosystems? Are they decorative? What are the histories or energies that they perceive as we live and work on this land? There's a story in Aztec mythology about the rabbit in the moon. It tells that the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl traveled the earth as a man and became hungry and tired. A rabbit talked to him and offered itself as food, and in gratitude, the god lifted the image to the moon. The story is about selflessness, kindness, and connection between humans, animals, and the divine. Shifting ground was a presence under the moonlight in a landscape that witnesses both the ancient and the present. The ceramic grasses appear to emerge from the floor and concrete blocks in clustered formations. As I think about this work now, having made the individual grass blades, forming them into small clusters to be placed to form a larger landscape, it made me think about a reverence to the earth. The forms are placed on industrial materials and creates a symbolic landscape where native flora reclaim the space. The simplified terracotta shapes of low-growing prickly pears are fired without glaze, leaving the deep red clay exposed to reference the permanence of rock formations, and in this case, as a prickly pear, about my Mexican heritage. I used a palette of blues and grays and browns to evoke the feeling of a nocturnal ecology and the life that awakens after the sun sets. I sealed the surfaces with terra sigillata and layers of soda ash, creating a subtle shift of color, from light blue to dark patinas, just as the changing tones of the night sky. I also created larger clay drawings to expand the dialogue between land, flora, and their symbolisms. One of these pieces was exhibited in a group show titled Chateau Show, an annual project where artists transformed the Aldrich House, a historic mansion in Dallas. Outside the patio, I installed the grasses from shifting ground to create the illusion that nature was emerging from the stones of the fountain. This project was only on view for 3 days, and yet, moments like these, living briefly with the work, they helped me discover new connections and ways of seeing. Currently, some of these grasses are also at the Riverside Museum at the Cheech Center for Chicano Arts and Culture in California. I created a small encounter. As the grasses were arranged below the drawing, it felt like making an offering to the land. I've been calling these compositions Listening to the Ground. The presentation is part of the exhibition Soy de Texas, a statewide survey of Latinx art, and the clay drawing is titled Sacred Wildflower. The drawing is made with terracotta slip from the same project that I used in my 2022 border project. It felt important to use this material because of the memory that it carries. The clay had traveled with me for the border project on both sides of the US and Mexico border. And the flower petals are made from porcelain slip, a way of reflecting on the sacredness of plant life. The past works had led me to study Malinal Xochitl, the exiled desert goddess. She ruled over the desert night, the scorpions, the snakes, and other nocturnal beings. Her story is one of abandonment, transformation, and survival. Her name combines the words grass and flower. She was a sorceress, also known for inducing hallucinations, and it's said that she's abandoned by her brother Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. He left her behind as he journeyed south to find a new home for the Mexica people. Now, in my work, I see mythology as stories that reveal our human search for understanding. And to me, the story reflects how women are often cast aside or blamed simply for being themselves. But I see her differently. In the exhibition Grass Flower in Austin, Texas, I created a desert landscape at night where the deity becomes synonymous with nature. She exists in harmony with the land, the cosmos, and time. As the sculptures rise from the ground, appearing to wilt and bloom, their shapes are warped by time and environment, much like our own experiences. As a deity, she's connected to both the cosmos and the earth, existing across cycles of transformation. The surfaces were built up with thin layers of glaze that create depth and evoke the shifting colors of the desert night and twilight, moments when the hues of desert plants become harder to define. The colors settle into the soft browns and subtle hints of blue, each piece carrying washes of manganese and cobalt glazes that tie the earth to the atmosphere, connecting land and sky. These cacti were imperfect forms. They bend, they crack, they bloom. They represent growth through challenge, fragility that holds strength. I think of them as my clay daughters, portraits of endurance, inspired by my mother, my grandmother, and her mother. Women whose stories lived through this work, their strength, their care, and connection to the land. Like that of the desert goddess and figures like Sor Juana, they are the foundation of the things that I make. The sculptures varied in size and were open both at the top and the bottom, acting as conduits between land, ourselves, and sky. This piece here is titled Balinal Xochitl, honoring the deity of the same name. The cactus form had sharp ridges and flowers whose petals moved gently with the wind. This was the only piece with that radiant blue glaze which I continued to develop for the exhibition today. The surface was built up with a glaze that created a variegated surface with cobalt and washes of manganese to create a sense of depth and shifting in color. In this exhibition, the grasses I made, they formed denser clusters that captured the elusive tones of moonlight and the land. Each blade was shaped by hand through coiling and pressing, which is a meditative process that allowed me to focus on movement and rhythm. As I continue expanding this portrait of the desert goddess, I think of my practice as an archive of land, a collaboration between clay and myself. Materials become symbols of different histories and functions, much like the concrete that I used in this exhibition that represents the infrastructure in cities. I think about the city where I grew up, an industrial landscape surrounded by the desert. Or the temples like this one in Malinalco and Tenochtitlan, where the ruins honor the deities. I see these ancient structures as hidden stories between my own encounters throughout our modern cities, and see the plants that grow between the cracks of sidewalks, steps, and homes that become the traces of life that continue to shape us. For this show, the concrete blocks become plinths that ground the sculptures, reminding me of the steps of those platforms from the ancient temples. The grasses that are placed and seem to grow from these platforms shift from grass to sharp blades to depict the dual nature of the desert. She's beautiful as she's dangerous, just like the goddess. Today, in between the land and sky, the concrete blocks are the foundations that elevate the desert goddess, where the desert grass becomes connective tissue that grows from the ground and connects us to our surroundings. In this interpretation of the desert deity, inspired by the poetry of Sor Juana, and her pursuit of knowledge parallels the goddess power of her nature. In this exhibition, both women who in solitude turn their isolation into strength and their creativity into power. I think about the strength of women like them and like my own family and their teachings. When I look at the moon and the stars, I think about how we are connected, made of the same stardust. The glazes that bloom into golden spots within the blue and rock-like surfaces are like galaxies in the distance. The sculptures can appear like vessels, but again, they are open at the top and the bottom and act as conduits between the land and sky. Moving forward, I'm working on a project for the Sandhills Institute in Nebraska. I have spent some time there over the past 2 summers in Rushville, a small town surrounded by agricultural fields and ranch land. The project will conclude next summer as an installation at a historical house museum that preserves objects donated by generations of communities in this area. I hope that you enjoy the exhibition today, Between the Land and Sky, and find that slowing down helps us connect not just to each other and to the earth, but also within ourselves. Thank you so much, and I guess that's it for me. Thanks.